Deep beneath the forges, a secret waited in the dark. Celebrian, a young elven forgemaster, found it by accident, a chamber hidden for ages. Inside lay a cache of ancient star metal, cool to the touch, yet humming with latent power, and beside it, a prophecy etched into stone. It spoke of a great power, a creation that could either shield her people from a looming shadow or plunge them into ruin. This discovery placed an immense weight upon her, a burden of forbidden knowledge and terrible responsibility. By the end of this story, you will understand the true, hidden cost behind the most powerful artifacts ever made. What would you do if you held the power to save your world, but using it might doom you completely? I would love to know where you are listening from right now and what the local time is for you. The talisman pulsed with a soft, silver light in her palm, a perfect, humming chord of captured starlight. Celebrian's triumph was immediate, a surge of pure magic that made the very air shimmer, but the victory was fleeting. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion crashed over her, so profound her legs buckled. The forge, moments ago blazing with heat, was now gripped by an unnatural chill, the very stones weeping with a cold dew. It was into this scene of frozen triumph that Lord Celebrimbor found her. His gaze moved from her pale, drained face to the radiant artifact in her hand, and a storm of conflicting emotions crossed his own. His voice was a whisper, heavy with memory. You have done what none of our kind have dared in an age. The skill, the purity of your craft, it is breathtaking. But this power, this star metal, it is not a mere tool. It is a whisper that echoes. He knelt, his eyes locked on the talisman. The last time such arts were practiced, in the First Age, they birthed wonders that became curses. They drew the attention of the darkness itself, and as he spoke, a faint tremor seemed to pass through the world, a subtle wrongness in the wind that swept down from the shadowed east. His pride as a master forger warred with a dread he had long buried. To encourage her was to unlock a door best left sealed. To forbid her was to perhaps doom their people to a future without a shield. The choice was his, and the weight of ages settled upon his shoulders. Lord Celebrimbor's decision was made in the deep silence of the night. He summoned the senior forgemasters not to the grand halls, but to a sealed chamber far below the main forges, a place where the very walls absorbed sound. The air was thick with the scent of cold stone and old magic. In the center of a round obsidian table, Celebrian's talisman lay pulsating with its soft, captured light. Beside it, the stone slab of the prophecy rested, its etched lines seeming to shift in the dimness. He presented the artifacts without preamble, his voice low and grave. We stand at a crossroads long foreseen, he said. One of our own has unlocked a power, and a peril we believed lost to time. The reaction was immediate and fractured. Master Faelivrin, his hands scarred from centuries at the anvil, saw only salvation. He leaned forward, his eyes alight. This is not a curse, it is a gift. With this star metal and the guidance of the prophecy, we can forge bulwarks to protect our last remaining havens. We can create shields that even the shadow cannot pierce. Our duty is to our people, to their survival. But from the other side of the table, Mistress Galadriel's voice cut through, cold and sharp as winter iron. Survival. You speak of survival, while holding a flame that will draw every moth in the darkness. Do you think he, the great enemy, will not feel this? She gestured to the talisman. The first time such power was wrought, it lit a beacon that brought war and ruin upon all of Middle-earth. We are not stronger than our ancestors. We are merely more desperate. To walk this path is to invite the very doom we seek to avoid. Into this storm of fear and hope, Celebrian stepped. Her voice, though young, did not tremble. She looked from one ancient, worried face to another. What is our craft for, if not for this very moment? We are not smiths of plows and nails. We are forgemasters. Our purpose is to shape power, to bend the substance of the world to a higher will. To refuse this duty out of fear is to betray the very essence of who we are. We have been given a key, a chance to build a defense. To hide from it is not wisdom, it is cowardice. Her words were a spark on dry tinder. The council shattered. Accusations of recklessness were met with charges of cowardice. The unified guild, a brotherhood that had endured for millennia, fractured along a new, terrible line. One faction, led by the fiery Selibrian, saw in Celebrian a new hope, a prodigy to lead them into a new age of creation. The other, heeding Galadriel's grim warning, saw only a repeat of the ancient follies of the Noldor, the pride that always preceded a fall. Lord Celebrimbor watched the schism unfold, his own heart torn. He had hoped for consensus, for a clear path forward. Instead, he was left with a divided house. In that moment, as the arguments echoed in the sealed chamber, the seeds were sown, not just of a great work, but of a bitter betrayal. For when trust between masters breaks, the door is left open for whispers from the shadows to find a willing ear. Into this fractured guild came a stranger. He called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, and his arrival seemed less like chance and more like fate. His form was fair, his voice a melody of wisdom and promise, and he spoke a language of craft that resonated deeply with the despairing Celebrimbor. Here, at last, seemed to be the mentor he so desperately needed, a being of immense knowledge who could unite the divided forgemasters and guide their hands to a true mastery of the star metal. Annatar's teachings were a revelation, unlocking secrets of binding power to form that they had only ever dreamed of. Yet from the very first council, Selibrian felt a cold unease. His answers were too perfect, his solutions too elegant, and his eyes lingered on the cache of star metal with a hunger that felt anything but benevolent. She watched him in the forge, his graceful hands moving with an impossible precision, and noticed how the very flames seemed to bow to his will, burning not with a natural orange, but with a subdued, golden light. When she voiced her doubts, whispering to Celebrimber that this stranger asked no price for his priceless knowledge, the master forger gently dismissed her concerns. His desperation for a solution had clouded his legendary discernment. He saw a savior, while she sensed a predator who had found a flock already at war with itself. The corruption began not with a shout, but with a whisper. Under Annatar's guidance, their designs evolved. The initial goal had been defense, protection, a shield for their people. But Annatar spoke of a higher purpose, a more permanent solution. Why merely shield a city, he would muse, when one could instead govern the very flow of power within a land? Why create a talisman when one could forge a vessel of absolute will? His logic was seductive, and it slowly twisted their noble aim into something far more ambitious and far more dangerous. The methods changed too. Where their old craft was a song of cooperation with the materials, Annatar taught techniques of domination, of compelling the star metal's light into rigid, unyielding forms. The forges no longer hummed with a shared melody of creation. They thrummed with a single, commanding note. Celebrían would look at the designs taking shape, beautiful and terrible in their complexity, and she no longer saw shields. She saw crowns, she saw shackles, and she understood, with a sinking heart, that they were no longer building a wall to keep the darkness out. They were forging keys, and Annatar was patiently, expertly, teaching them which doors to unlock. The first 3 rings were born in a crucible of light and hope. Celebrían, Selibramber, and their most trusted allies worked in a sanctum sealed against the world, their every breath a harmony of focused will. Annatar stood apart, a silent conductor whose slightest gesture corrected a flaw or intensified a flow of energy. They poured not just magic into the molten star metal, but something far more personal, a fragment of their own immortal spirits, a sacrifice meant to tether the ring's power to preservation and healing. The air itself seemed to weep with beauty as the bands of gold took shape, each one a masterpiece of ethereal craft. Yet, as the final notes of the enchantment were woven, Celebrían felt a sudden, jarring discord. It was a resonance buried deep within the ring's perfect song, a faint harmonic that spoke not of growth and protection, but of control and dominion. She tried to smooth it, to pour more of her own spirit into mending the hidden flaw, but the dissonance remained, a silent shiver only she could perceive. Her eyes met Celebrimber's, radiant with triumph, and then found Annatar's, who offered a serene, unreadable smile. In that moment, her heart split in two. One half swelled with pride at their impossible achievement, a testament to her master's genius and their shared sacrifice. The other half coiled with a cold, certain dread. They had given everything to this creation, but as the 3 rings cooled on the velvet-lined pedestal, their song felt less like a completed symphony and more like a question that had been left dangerously unanswered. Celebrían's dread became a cold, sharp certainty she could no longer ignore. Alone in her chamber, with only the silver light of her first talisman for company, she performed a forbidden act. She wove its starlight into a mirror of truth, a scrying pool of pure energy that showed not what was, but what truly is. The vision struck her like a physical blow. The serene, golden-hued Annatar was gone. In his place stood a being of immense shadow and flame, towering in a cavern of fire, and in his grasp was a band of blazing gold, so immense and terrible it seemed to drink the light from the very air around it. As he worked his dark craft upon it, Celebrían did not hear the words of its making, but she felt their intent, a single, dominating chord designed to enslave every other ring of power, to twist all their purposes into one terrible, unified will. Her own talisman flared in protest, its song of protection screaming into a silent void. She fell back, the vision shattering, her heart pounding with a terror more profound than any she had ever known. She found Celebrímbor not in the grand halls, but at the very anvil where they had forged the 3. He was admiring a sketch, his face alight with a father's pride. She did not mince words. "Annatar is not our savior," she gasped, her voice raw. "He is the shadow we feared. He forges a master ring in a pit of fire, a band to bind all others to his will. Our work, our sacrifice, it was all a trap." Celebrimber's face darkened, not with fear, but with a hot, defensive rage. "You speak of the one who gave us our greatest triumph. Your fear has curdled into envy, Selibrian, or perhaps madness, to accuse our greatest ally of such deceit." But she stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. "Look into my eyes, master, and tell me I am lying. See the truth you already know in your heart." The anger in his eyes faltered. He saw the absolute conviction in her, the unshakable horror, and the memory of his own quiet doubts, so carefully suppressed, came rushing back. The elegant solutions, the hunger for the star metal, the subtle shift in their craft from preservation to dominion. His shoulders slumped, the great master forger brought low by a terrible, dawning realization. She was right. In that moment, the last vestige of his trust in Annatar died, and with it, the unbroken bond between master and apprentice, fractured under the weight of his own prideful blindness. His voice was a hollow whisper. "What have I done?" Then, a grim resolve hardened his features. He made a choice that would echo through the ages. Moving with a frantic, silent urgency, he gathered the 3 Elven Rings. He did not hide them in a vault or a treasure room. Instead, he used the last of his untainted craft, weaving illusions and misdirection spells so profound that the rings themselves seemed to vanish from the world, their glorious song muted to the faintest of echoes, placed far from the forges and hidden from the sight of the one they now knew as the Great Deceiver. The golden mask shattered the moment Annatar felt the 3 rings vanish from his perception. A roar of pure, undiluted fury erupted from the house of the Murdain, a sound that cracked stone and melted windows into slag. The fair form of the Lord of Gifts dissolved, revealing the terrible, burning specter of Sauron in its place. His wrath was a physical storm that scourged the city as he fled, his grand design incomplete, his dominion now contested by his own creations. In the smoldering silence he left behind, Celebrimber stood before his fractured people. His pride was ash in his mouth. With a voice stripped of all its former authority, he confessed everything. He spoke of his own desperate arrogance, of how he had welcomed the serpent into their midst, and he revealed the terrible truth of the other rings of power. They were not gifts, but shackles. 16 rings, already distributed, were now snares for the hearts of elves, dwarves, and men, their powers irrevocably tied to the one ring, forged in the fires of Eregion. "We have been instruments of our own enemy," he declared, his words a public penance. "The time for forging is over. Now we must learn to wield swords." The schism that had divided them was instantly forgotten, replaced by a unified, grim resolve. As the forges were retooled to make weapons, and the city walls were fortified, a quieter, more profound duty fell to Selibrian. Celebrimber entrusted her with the entirety of their secret lore concerning the 3. She alone held the keys to their hiding places, the nuances of their making, the full understanding of their untarnished power. The apprentice was gone. In her place stood a guardian, the sole keeper of a light that must never be extinguished, and the weight of that knowledge settled upon her soul like a mantle of cold iron. Eregion held its breath, a jewel awaiting the hammer. The hammer fell upon Eregion without mercy. Sauron's legions, A tide of orcs and twisted creatures crashed against the city's walls with a single, brutal purpose: to seize the forges and the knowledge within. The grand libraries, repositories of ancient craft, were among the first targets, their scrolls and stones meant for the pyre. Celebrían stood at the main gate of the central hall, the heart of the Myrdain, her hands pressed against the shuddering wood. Around her, the song of battle was a terrible, dissonant chorus of steel and screams. She could feel the dark will pressing against their defenses, a suffocating presence seeking a crack, a weakness. Drawing her silver talisman, she poured its light into the gate's ancient timbers. A web of shimmering starlight flared across the surface, and for a moment, the assault was thrown back, the enemy recoiling from the pure, protective energy. But the talisman's light was a candle against a storm. Each blow against the gate sent a jolt of agony through her, the star metal's song straining under the relentless assault. She knew, with a cold, tactical certainty, that the light would not hold. They were minutes, not hours, from being overrun. The choice was laid bare before the surviving defenders, a grim echo of the council's old debate. They could make their final stand here, a glorious, defiant end amidst the ruins of their craft, or they could attempt a desperate, bloody breakout through the enemy's rear lines, a flight into the unknown with whatever and whoever they could save. Celebrian looked at the faces around her, smeared with soot and grim with resolve, and her decision was made. Glory was a luxury for ballads. Her duty was to the living and to the future. "We fall back," she commanded, her voice cutting through the din. "Secure the core lore scrolls. We save our people, not our stones." The order was a bitter draft, but it was the only one that offered any hope. As the elves began their fighting retreat, she directed the last surge of the talisman's power, not to hold the gate, but to blind their pursuers with a final, brilliant flash of light. It was a distraction, a precious handful of seconds bought at the cost of the hall itself. They fled through hidden passages as the main doors splintered and gave way. Behind them, they heard the roar of the enemy host pouring into their sacred space, the sound of shattering anvils and rending tapestries. The forges of Eregion, once the brightest jewel of elven craft, fell into shadow, their fires extinguished and their songs silenced. The retreat from Eregion was a long, bloody scar across the land. Celebrían led a tattered band of survivors, their steps dogged by the shadows of their fallen home. At their center, borne on a litter, was Lord Celebrimbor, his body broken and his spirit shrouded in a deeper wound, the knowledge of his own catastrophic error. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl, sent a fresh wave of tension through the group. They were not just fleeing a ruined city, they were carrying a secret that could doom the entire world, and the enemy knew it. Their only hope lay in reaching the havens of Lindon, the realm of the High King Gil-galad, but the path was a gauntlet of Sauron's hunting parties. One moonless night, as they sheltered in a narrow ravine, the silence was shattered. Not by a roar, but by the soft, deliberate click of armored feet on stone above them. They were surrounded. Torches flared along the ridge, illuminating the grotesque faces of orcs, their arrows already nocked. There was no time for a fighting retreat, no high ground to claim. In that heartbeat, facing annihilation, Selibrian made a choice that defied every warning. From a hidden pouch, she drew not her silver talisman, but one of the three, Nenya, the ring of water, its adamant band cool against her skin. As she slipped it onto her finger, the world did not explode with light. Instead, a deep, resonant hum filled the air, and from the very stones and the stream at their feet, a thick, pearlescent mist began to rise. It was not a natural fog. It swirled with a will of its own, clinging to the elves, masking their forms and their scent, weaving a tapestry of silence and obscurity around the entire ravine. The orc arrows, loosed a moment later, hissed harmlessly into the deepening murk. Their targets vanished. The ambush dissolved into confused shouts, and the sounds of creatures stumbling into one another in the sudden blindness. They were saved, but the cost was immediate and profound. As the mist clung to them, Celebrian felt a chilling cold seep into her bones, a deep and vital energy being drawn out of her and into the ring's power. The world swam before her eyes, colors leaching away into a gray haze. She swayed on her feet, her breath coming in shallow gasps, and in that moment of supreme exertion, she felt a terrible, focused attention turn their way. It was a mind of fire and shadow, scanning the land, and for one searing instant, it locked onto the beacon of the ring's active power. She had hidden them from the foot soldiers, but she had lit a signal fire for their master. The reprieve was bought, but the price was her own strength, and their last shred of secrecy. From that night on, the pursuit changed. It was no longer a hunt for fleeing refugees. It became a relentless, personal crusade. The forces that harried them were larger, more cunning, driven by a fury that seemed to scent their very blood. They were no longer just prey. They were the key to a prize Sauron would burn the world to possess. The relentless pursuit finally found a moment of stillness within the hidden grove where they had taken refuge. Selibrian knelt beside the litter where Celebrimber lay, his breathing a shallow, ragged whisper. The Grand Master Forger was a shadow of himself, his body broken by battle, but his eyes, when they opened, held a deeper torment. He gestured for her to come closer, his voice so faint she had to lean in to hear the words that would change everything. The rings, he confessed, his gaze fixed on the canopy above. Our fates are woven into their very essence. To create them was to bind a part of our own spirits to their power. Every time they are used, that bond deepens. It is a slow fading, a giving of your own light to sustain theirs. His hand trembled as he reached for hers. My pride has cost me everything, but it is you who will pay the price of my ignorance. You felt the cold, the drain, when you used Nenya. That was not merely exhaustion. It was a piece of your immortality, spent, a sacrifice for a moment's shelter. He looked at her then, and for the first time, there was no conflict in his eyes, only a terrible, clear certainty. You must be their guardian now, not just the rings, but the truth of their cost. The leadership of our people, what remains of the Murdain, it falls to you. I pass it to you not as a title, but as a burden. Protect them from the rings, even as you protect the rings from him. His strength failed him then, his head falling back against the rough blanket. The weight of his confession settled upon Selibrian, a solemn and chilling inheritance. The apprentice was gone, the master was fading, and in the quiet of the grove, she understood the full measure of her duty. She was now the sole bearer of a terrible knowledge, the keeper of three lights, whose very brilliance demanded a piece of her soul to shine. The forest path forked ahead, a choice between shadow and deeper shadow. Celebrian was urging the survivors down the southern trail, her voice a low, urgent command, when she realized Celebrimber was no longer with the column. She turned to find him standing at the fork, his gaze fixed back the way they had come. He had taken up a fallen soldier's sword, and in his eyes was a calm, terrible resolve. He knew what she had felt when she used the ring, the beacon it had lit in the dark. Sauron's hunt was now singular, focused entirely on the one who had forged the three, and the one who now guarded them. They would never outrun it, not together. His voice, though weak, carried a final, unshakable authority. Lead them to the havens. Do not look back. This is a debt I must pay. Before she could protest, he turned and walked north, away from safety, his steps slow but deliberate. He was not fleeing. He was drawing the hunt. He walked until he reached a high, rocky clearing, a place where the trees fell away and the sky opened up. There he stopped and waited. He did not have to wait long. The vanguard of the pursuit poured from the tree line, orcs and larger, crueler things, their weapons glinting in the pale light. Celebrimber stood his ground, the borrowed sword feeling alien in his smith's hands. He was no warrior of legend, but in that moment, he fought with the furious precision of a master, correcting his final, gravest mistake. Every parry, every thrust, was not meant to kill, but to delay. He was a rock in a river, diverting the entire torrential force of the enemy's attention onto himself. He fought until his arms were leaden, and his body screamed in protest, until he was surrounded by a ring of fallen foes, but more kept coming. He was finally overwhelmed not by skill, but by sheer, grinding numbers, dragged down and bound in chains. As the dark soldiers hauled him away, his final thought was not of pain or fear, but of a single, clear calculation. The sounds of pursuit to the south had faded. The path was clear. He had bought them their time. The fall of the greatest forgemaster of the age was not a defeat, but a transaction. He traded his freedom, his knowledge, and ultimately his life, for a handful of seconds on a forest path, a head start for a future he would never see. His defiance became a whisper on the wind, a story told not of a glorious death in battle, but of a quiet, deliberate choice to use his own fall as a shield for others. The choice to avoid Lothlórien was a deliberate one. Selibrian knew that any established sanctuary, no matter how well defended, would be the first place Sauron's gaze would turn. His victory was not complete while the three remained hidden and their guardians still breathed, and a concentration of surviving forgemasters in a single, glorious city would be an irresistible target. So she led her weary band away from the roads of power, deep into the wild, forgotten corners of Middle-earth. Their new home was not a city of malorn trees or stone palaces, but a network of caves behind a thundering waterfall, the roar of water a constant, concealing cloak for their whispered counsels, and the faint, dangerous glow of their remaining craft. Here, in this damp and echoing sanctuary, Celebrian's true trial began. She was no longer just a guardian of artifacts, but a leader of broken people. The forgemasters who had followed her were shadows of their former selves, their hands, once skilled enough to weave starlight, now often shaking from more than just the cold. Every snapped twig outside their hidden entrance sent a wave of tension through the camp. Whispers began to circulate, quiet accusations, questioning her every decision. Why had they not sought the protection of Galadriel and Celeborn? Was this isolation a strategy, or was it merely the cowardice of a young leader, terrified of failing in front of her elders? The weight of Celebrimbor's final trust felt like a physical chain around her neck. She saw the paranoia take root. A master smith would accuse his apprentice of lingering too long near the entrance, suggesting he was listening for a signal to betray them all. A guardian of a minor lore scroll would refuse to share its contents, fearing the knowledge would be stolen and used to bargain for their lives. The very unity that had allowed them to escape Eregion was crumbling into 1,000 tiny, suspicious fragments. Celebrian's resolve was tested not in a grand battle, but in these small, daily moments of fear. She moved among them, her voice a calm, steady counterpoint to the rising panic. She took shifts on watch herself, shared her own meager rations, and in the dim firelight, she would speak not of grand plans for vengeance, but of simple, grounding truths, the memory of the forge's warmth, the shared song of a successful enchantment. She was not just leading them, she was patiently, painstakingly, reforging their broken spirits into a new, quieter kind of strength, the strength of those who have nothing left to lose but each other. The hidden forge was a place of whispers and water. Deep within the valley, behind a curtain of falling mist, the surviving forgemasters worked not with roaring flames, but with the subtle energies of starlight and song. Their new anvils were slabs of river-smoothed stone, and their hammers fell with a soft, rhythmic chime, a stark contrast to the clamorous industry of Eregion. Here, their purpose was not creation, but comprehension. They studied the 3 rings from a distance, using lenses of crystal and pools of still water to observe the intricate flows of power within them without ever touching their bands. It was meticulous, painstaking work, and it led to a chilling discovery. The rings were pure, yes. Their song was one of preservation and growth, untainted by Sauron's direct hand. Yet they were not independent. A thin, almost invisible thread of destiny connected each one to a central, terrible source, a dissonant chord that resonated from the heart of Mordor. The 3 were like beautiful, intricate locks, but the one ring was the master key that could someday turn them all. This revelation settled over the sanctuary like a frost. They could hide, they could protect, they could even use their rings in moments of dire need, but they would never be truly free. Their fate, and the fate of all they sought to preserve, was shackled to the very artifact designed to enslave them. Their work transformed then, becoming a desperate race against a shadow they could not outrun. Every experiment, every whispered theory, was now aimed at a single, seemingly impossible goal: to find a way to sever that binding thread, to break the chain of destiny before the hand that held it closed into a fist. The silence in their hidden sanctuary shattered in a single, terrible instant. It was not a sound that broke it, but a wave of pure, malevolent will that washed over the land. Every elf in the valley froze, their hearts seizing as a shadow passed over the sun. For Celebrian, the sensation was a physical violation. The adamant band of Nenya, which had felt like a cool, comforting thread of power, suddenly became a burning brand on her finger. A voice, vast and ancient and full of fire, spoke a single, commanding word directly into her soul, a word of binding and ownership that sought to twist her very will into a tool for its dark purpose. Her own spirit recoiled in horror. Without a moment of thought, driven by a primal instinct for survival, She tore the ring from her finger. Across the wilderness, in the hidden refuges of the other guardians, the same scene unfolded simultaneously. The Elven Rings came off, their light vanishing as if snuffed out. It was a collective, unspoken act of defiance, a refusal to be enslaved by the very power they had helped create. In that moment, they saved themselves from eternal thraldom, but the cost was immediate and profound. The protective enchantments woven around their sanctuary, sustained by Nenya's gentle power, flickered and died. The concealing mists dissolved. The subtle harmonies that masked their presence from the world fell silent, and the valley was laid bare, a suddenly vulnerable pocket of light in a rapidly darkening world. Their greatest tools, the culmination of their craft and sacrifice, were now dormant, locked away in secret caskets, too dangerous to even touch. They had been forced to disarm themselves completely in the face of an enemy whose power had just become absolute. The strategy of preservation was over. Now, they had to learn the art of becoming ghosts. The world had become a library of ghosts, and Selibrian was determined to read their final words. With the three rings silent and their sanctuary exposed, passive survival was no longer an option. They needed answers that their own lore could not provide, knowledge from a time before the Shadow's latest rise. And so, with a small, trusted band, she ventured into the wilds, heading for the ruins of Ost-in-Edhil, the shattered capital of Eregion. The journey was a harrowing traverse through a land now poisoned by Sauron's influence. They did not face armies, but the land itself seemed to resist them. Rivers ran with a sickly film, and ancient trees creaked with a malevolent sentience, their branches twisting to block paths that had been open for centuries. In one narrow pass, they triggered a remnant of old elven magic, a defensive ward laid down in the first days of the war. It was not a spell of fire or force, but of memory, projecting the final, terrified moments of the cities fall directly into their minds. The psychic echo of shattering glass and elven war cries was so vivid that two of her companions fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the phantom anguish. Celebrian herself had to grip a nearby rock, anchoring herself in the present against the tide of past horror, whispering the names of the living to drown out the screams of the dead. Pushing through this spectral gauntlet, they finally reached the ruins of the great library. It was a skeleton of scorched marble and collapsed archways, open to the sky. For days, they sifted through ash and rubble, their hope fading with the light. Then, one of her scouts found it, a sealed stone chest, protected by a collapsed pillar, its contents miraculously preserved. Inside were not grand tomes, but fragments, shards of clay tablets and brittle scrolls, the last testament of the lore masters who had died defending their knowledge. The script was archaic, the metaphors dense and layered. They pieced the fragments together like a terrible puzzle. The text spoke of a fundamental law of creation, that a thing of such profound power could only be undone by the very source of its making. The magic was not merely in the materials or the incantations, but in the place, the specific confluence of earthly fire and celestial energy that had given the rings their form. To unmake a ring of power, one would have to return it to the fires of its birth. The revelation was a crushing blow. The three were forged in the secret heart of Eregion, in sanctums now drowned in darkness and defiled by the enemy. To even approach those forges was a suicide mission. Yet, within that despair, a single, desperate flicker of hope remained. If the rings could be unmade, then the chain could be broken. The dominion of the One was not necessarily eternal. It was a path forward so fraught with peril, it seemed like madness, but it was a path. And for the first time since the shadow fell, they had a direction, not just a hiding place. The path to the dwarven gates felt like walking into the mouth of a stone giant. Khazad-dûm's entrance was a vast, dark archway carved into the side of the mountain, utterly silent, giving no hint of the immense kingdom that thrived within. Celebrian stood before it with a small escort, feeling the weight of centuries of isolation. Elves and dwarves had been allies once, long ago, but that was an age of brighter suns. Now, suspicion was the default language between their peoples. When the great stone doors finally slid open with a rumble that shook the ground, it was not to a welcoming party, but to a phalanx of armored guards, their bearded faces stern and unreadable beneath ornate helms. Their leader, a grim-faced captain, looked past the elves' travel-worn cloaks and saw only potential spies, or worse, desperate refugees who would bring the eye of the enemy to their very doorstep. He spoke in the common tongue, but his tone was the hard, unyielding stone of the mountain itself. State your business, elf. The gates of Khazad-dûm are not open to all who wander. Selibrian knew that pride would be a swift path to failure. She did not flinch from his gaze, but her voice was calm, devoid of the haughtiness dwarves often expected from her kind. We do not come as wanderers, but as descendants of those who once traded mithril for starlight with your king, Durin himself. We seek not shelter within your halls, but passage beneath your mountain. We ask for an audience, to speak of a shadow that grows tall enough to darken both our doors. She offered no demands, only a statement of shared threat. It was a careful gamble, acknowledging their past kinship without presuming upon it, and framing their need as a matter of mutual interest. The captain was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers for deceit. Then, with a curt nod, he turned. The king will hear you, but leave your weapons and your magic at the gate. The throne room of Khazad-dûm was a breathtaking cavern, its pillars soaring into darkness, lit by the cold, clear light of crystals and the warm glow of countless forges echoing in the deep. King Durin sat upon a stone throne, surrounded by his most trusted thanes. The air was thick with the scent of stone dust and metal, a familiar aroma that nonetheless felt alien to the elves. Celebrian did not bow, but she offered a deep, respectful nod, an acknowledgement of his sovereignty in his own realm. She spoke plainly, laying out the truth of their flight from Eregion and the nature of the enemy that had destroyed it. She spoke of Sauron's rise, his deception, and his endless legions, but she was careful. She did not mention the 3 rings. That secret was a burden she could not share, a truth too dangerous for any outside their most trusted circle. Instead, she spoke of the danger to all free peoples, of orc armies that would not stop at the ruins of an elven city. The dwarves listened, their expressions guarded. They respected strength and honesty, and her lack of embellishment worked in her favor. The negotiations that followed were a delicate dance. The dwarves were a pragmatic people. They saw the strategic value in having the elves as a buffer, a fighting force to occupy the enemy's attention on the Western Front, but they were also fiercely independent and secretive. They would not commit their own armies to an open war. A formal alliance was out of the question, a risk that would paint a target on their own mountain. The debate lasted for hours, a slow, grinding process of proposal and counter-proposal. Celebrian's greatest challenge was not the king, but his more conservative thanes, who argued that the elves' plight was of their own making, a result of their reckless meddling with powers they should have left alone. Why should we risk the wealth and safety of Khazad-dûm for those who courted their own destruction? One thane grumbled, his voice echoing in the hall. Celebrian's reply was not one of pleading, but of cold, hard logic. "You are right," she conceded, stunning the thane into silence. "Our pride blinded us. But the fire we lit now threatens to become a wildfire that will consume these mountains as surely as it consumed our city. We do not ask you to fight our war. We ask you to allow us to fight it by granting us the means to survive. We ask for passage through your lands, so our people may move without being hunted in the open. We ask to trade for steel and supplies, so we may remain a thorn in the enemy's side, a distraction that keeps his gaze turned away from your unimaginable wealth." She was not asking for a shield, but offering to be a sword, and the dwarves understood the language of strategic advantage. In the end, a pact was struck. It was not written in gold or sworn on sacred oaths, but sealed with a clasping of forearms, a dwarven custom of grave import. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm would grant the elves safe, secret passage through the eastern gates of their realm. They would engage in limited, discreet trade for essential supplies. It was a pact of non-aggression and mutual convenience, a thin thread of cooperation where a mighty chain of alliance had once been. As Selibrian and her escort were led back to the sunlight, the great stone doors closing behind them with a final, definitive thud, she felt a wave of profound relief, quickly followed by a spike of new anxiety. She had secured a lifeline, a crucial route to safety, and a means to sustain their resistance. But she had also introduced a dangerous new variable. The dwarves were allies of circumstance, not of heart. Their help came with a price, the constant fear that their secretive nature or their own self-interest could become a crack in their fragile defense, a potential weakness the enemy would be all too eager to exploit. The air in Eregion tasted of ash and forgotten songs. Celebrian moved like a wisp of smoke through the skeletal remains of her city, a hand-picked team of her most skilled forgemasters shadowing her every step. This was no triumphant homecoming. It was a descent into a tomb they had narrowly escaped. The grand plazas were choked with weeds, the white towers now blackened fingers clawing at a sullen sky. Every shadow seemed to hold its breath, and the silence was a heavier burden than any noise, for it was a watchful silence, broken only by the distant, guttural calls of orc patrols. The heart of their old power, the great forges, was no longer a place of creation. It had been transformed into a fortress of the enemy, a pulsating knot of dark energy they could feel from a mile away. Their path was a ghost's walk, a test of memory and nerve. They slipped through shattered colonnades and over piles of rubble that had once been libraries and homes. More than once, they had to freeze, pressing themselves into crevices as a troop of armored Uroks marched past, their iron-shod boots echoing on the broken stone. But the physical guards were only half the danger. Sauron had salted the earth with his own malevolent craft. One of their scouts, a master of detecting hidden enchantments, narrowly avoided a patch of ground that shimmered with a faint, oily light. It was a web spell designed to snare any living thing that touched it in a paralyzing nightmare. Another time, the very air in an archway congealed around them, a silent alarm that would have screamed their location to every creature in the ruins had they not collectively woven a counter-harmony on the spot, their whispered notes unraveling the dark magic just enough to slip through. The central forge district was the most heavily guarded. The great smithy doors, once thrown open to the winds, were now sealed with a bar of black iron and etched with runes that bled a faint, red light. This was the threshold. To cross, it was to enter the lion's den, to walk directly into the place the enemy had claimed as his own. Celebrían looked at the faces of her companions, pale and grim in the gloom. She saw the fear in their eyes, but beneath it, a steely resolve. They had not come this far to turn back. With a series of hand signals, she directed them. Two took up positions as lookouts, their bows knocked. Another began the painstaking work of unpicking the runic lock, her fingers moving with a delicate precision that belied the terror of the moment. Each faint click of the mechanism being disarmed was a hammer blow in the tense quiet. They were exposed here, a handful of elves in the very center of their enemy's strength. One misplaced step, one misfired spell, and their mission, their lives, and the secret of the three would be extinguished forever. The door gave way with a soft, final sigh. It swung inward, revealing not the roaring inferno they expected, but a chilling darkness. The forges were cold, the great bellows were still, but the air that washed over them was thick with a residual malice, the psychic scar of the One Ring's creation. They had reached their goal, but standing on that threshold, Celebrían knew the true test was just beginning. They were about to walk into the heart of the memory of their own failure. The air within the central forge was a physical weight, thick with the residue of a perverted craft. The familiar sense of hot metal and clean fire were gone, replaced by the stench of sulfur and something ancient, like cold tombs open to the sun. The great anvils were not merely unused, they were twisted, their surfaces marred by jagged runes that seemed to drink the faint light from the entrance. In the center of the chamber, where the main fire pit should have roared, there was only a pool of absolute blackness, a void that hummed with a low, hateful frequency. It was more than a ruin, it was a wound, a place where the natural song of the world had been torn and replaced with a single, dissonant note of domination. Celebrían felt it like a sickness in her soul. They could not work their art here, not with this corruption seeping into the very stones. To even attempt their ritual in such a space would risk poisoning the light of the three themselves. The choice was stark. Leave this heart of their power in the hands of the shadow, or try to reclaim it, knowing the act would be like shouting their names in the dark. She looked at the faces of her companions, their resolve hardening in the oppressive gloom. "We cannot let this stand," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the malevolent hum. "We must cleanse this place. It is a risk we have to take." From their protected caskets, they brought forth the three. The moment the rings were removed, a soft light pushed back against the oppressive dark. Vilia's sapphire glowed with the clarity of a rain-washed sky, Naria's ruby with the warmth of a defiant hearth, and Nenya's adamant shone with the pure, untouchable light of the stars. The three bearers, Celebrían among them, did not don the rings. Instead, they held them aloft, focusing their collective will not on domination, but on restoration. They began to sing, not a song of power to command, but a song of memory, of healing. It was the same melody that had once echoed in these halls when the forges were lit for creation, not for destruction. The light from the rings intensified, weaving together into a single, brilliant cord that washed over the defiled chamber. Where it touched, the jagged runes on the anvils flaked away like old scabs. The pool of blackness in the fire pit recoiled, hissing as if touched by clean water, its boundaries shrinking until only scorched, bare stone remained. For a few precious moments, the forge was theirs again. The air grew lighter, the oppressive hum silenced, replaced by the fading echo of their own clear voices. It was a victory, fragile and beautiful, but light that bright cannot be hidden. As the last note of their song faded, a tremor passed through the mountain, a deep, resonant thrum of rage that emanated from the far east. The beacon they had lit to cleanse, the shadows had also been a signal fire. Seen by the very eye, they sought to evade. In the sudden, chilling silence that followed, they all felt it, a terrible, focused attention, now turning its gaze upon Eregion, scanning the ruins, searching for the source of that defiant light. Their time, which had felt so measured just moments before, was now collapsing around them. They had won a battle of purity, but they had started a war against time itself. Their flight from the cleansed forge was a blur of fear and desperate speed. Every echo in the ruins seemed to carry the sound of pursuit, every shadow to writhe with malevolent intent. They dared not use the rings again, for that would be like holding a lantern high for the hunter. Back in the safety of their hidden valley, the air was thick with a new kind of tension. The cleansing had been a profound act, but it had cost them their last shred of secrecy. They were living on borrowed time, and they all knew it. In the deep quiet of the waterfall cave, Celebrian pored over the few lore scrolls they had saved, her mind racing over the foundational melodies of their original craft. The rings were not just objects, they were frozen music, intricate compositions of power. The one ring was a single, deafening chord of domination, designed to overwhelm all other songs. But what if they did not need to fight volume with volume? What if, instead of a shield, they could compose a dissonance, a subtle counter-harmony that would throw the master chord out of tune without ever directly confronting it? This was the birth of her most desperate theory. She gathered the remaining masters, their faces etched with exhaustion and doubt. "We have been thinking like warriors trying to break a sword," she explained, her voice calm amidst the roaring water. "But we are musicians. We must think like musicians. The One Ring commands all other themes to fall in line with its own. But if we introduce a new melody, one of pure, untarnished creation, a song that resonates with the original intent of the three before Sauron's influence, it could create interference. It would not break the chain, but it could make the links too slippery for the master key to turn. The idea was a spark in the dark. It was a path that did not lead back to the cursed forges of Eregion. They could fight this war with song, not with fire. The work began immediately. They did not seek to create another ring of power, for that was the path of their downfall. Instead, they pooled their collective will, their remaining strength, and the last fragments of untainted star metal to craft a vessel for this counter-song. It was a simple silver circlet, unadorned and humble, meant not to hold power, but to project a single, pure frequency. The forging process was unlike any they had ever attempted. They were not compelling magic into a form, but weaving a tapestry of negation, a resonant absence of the shadow's taint. As they worked, their voices rising in a complex, interweaving harmony, the strain was immense. It was not a physical exhaustion, but a spiritual one, as if they were trying to remember a color they had never seen. And then, something extraordinary happened. As the counter song reached its first, fragile crescendo, the 3 elven rings, locked away in their caskets, began to hum in sympathetic vibration. A soft, silver light emanated from the chests, not the blazing signal of active use, but a gentle, answering glow. For a single, breathtaking moment, the circlet in their midst shone with a clear, unwavering light, and the oppressive weight of the one ring's distant presence seemed to lessen, as if a constant, barely audible drone had suddenly been silenced. Then the connection broke. The circlet's light faded to a soft glimmer, and the strain sent several of the masters stumbling to their knees. But the proof was there, etched into the stunned silence. They had not found a way to win the war, but they had discovered something just as vital. They had found a way to fight it. The deep, intricate connection between all the rings was not just a chain of slavery. It was a web of resonance, and they had just learned how to pluck a single, defiant string. The silver circlet hummed with a fragile, untested power. Their first target was a lesser ring, a band of black iron taken from the finger of a Nazgul servant in a long-past skirmish. It lay on a stone pedestal, radiating a palpable malice that made the air feel greasy and cold. The Forgemasters formed a circle around it, their faces set in grim concentration. Celebrían raised the circlet, and as one, they began the counter song, their voices weaving a tapestry of pure, resonant negation, aimed directly at the dark artifact. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the black ring began to vibrate, emitting a high, painful shriek that was the antithesis of music. Cracks of sickly green light spider-webbed across its surface. The counter song intensified, a brilliant silver chord pressing against the shrieking dissonance. There was a final, deafening crack, and the ring exploded. A wave of pure, unfiltered shadow erupted from the pedestal, a concussion of dark energy that threw the elves backward like leaves in a storm. The force was not physical, but spiritual, a backlash of the malice bound within the ring, now set violently free. Several Forgemasters cried out, clutching their heads or their chests, their inner light visibly dimmed by the contact with such concentrated hate. The air in the chamber stank of ozone and despair. The silence that followed was heavy with pain. They had done it. They had proven that their theory could unmake a ring of power, but the cost was written in the ashen faces of her people and the lingering chill of the released darkness. This was not a clean severance. It was a violent detonation. The power required to shatter even this lesser ring had been immense, and the backlash was catastrophic. Celebrían looked from the shards of black iron to her injured companions, her heart a cold stone in her chest. If this was the result with a minor band of domination, what would happen when they turned their song against one of the 3 artifacts infused with a far greater share of their own immortal spirits? The success was a phantom victory, revealing a path forward that was as suicidal as it was brilliant. The ambition that had driven them to create the rings now threatened to consume them in the attempt to break the chain. She had to decide if the salvation of Middle-earth was worth the almost certain destruction of its last, best guardians. The hunters had found their quarry. The first sign was the sudden silence in the valley, the birds and insects falling quiet as a shadow fell over the sun. Then came the drums, a slow, methodical beat that echoed off the canyon walls, a sound that promised no quarter. Sauron's vengeance was not an army, but a scalpel, a host of his most terrible servants dispatched with a single command, to extinguish the source of the dissonant song. From the cave mouth, Celebrian watched them advance, not a ragged horde of orcs, but disciplined ranks of Uruk-hai, their black armor gleaming dully, flanked by hulking trolls that carried massive rams. And at their rear, she saw the true horror, the pale, spectral forms of the Nazgul, their very presence a poison that made the air tremble. They were hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched. Their sanctuary, once a place of refuge, was now a trap. Celebrian's mind raced, discarding grand strategies for the brutal arithmetic of survival. "We cannot meet them on an open field," she told her people, her voice cutting through the rising fear. "We must make the land itself our ally." They had days, perhaps only hours. The Forgemasters became warriors of a different kind. They did not build walls, they laid snares. Using their knowledge of harmonics, they strung nearly invisible wires of enchanted silver between trees, wires that would vibrate with a shriek, capable of shattering armor and bone when disturbed. They diverted a small stream to create a boggy morass at the valley's narrowest point, a death trap for the heavy trolls. On the high cliffs, they loosened great piles of stone, ready to be sent crashing down with a single, well-placed lever. Every trick of earth and air was turned into a weapon. The battle began at dawn. The Uruks advanced with brutal efficiency, only to be met by the land itself turning against them. The first rank triggered the silver wires, the sonic blast, throwing them back in a spray of black blood and twisted metal. The trolls, lured into the bog, sank to their chests, bellowing in rage as elven archers found the weak points in their thick hides. For a time, it seemed their cleverness might prevail, but the enemy adapted. The Nazgul did not engage, but remained on the periphery, their silent will directing the assault, finding the flaws in their defenses. A company of Uruks, using grapnels and sheer tenacity, scaled a cliff face thought to be unscalable, flanking the main elven position. The fighting descended into close, desperate chaos. Selibrian fought with a grace born of desperation, her sword a blur of silver light, but for every Uruk she felled, two more took its place. She saw masters who had shaped starlight fall to crude iron blades. She saw the healing tents overflow with the wounded, their songs of power fading into whimpers of pain. The air was thick with the smell of blood and ozone, the beautiful counter song drowned out by the cacophony of war. They were being pushed back, inch by bloody inch, toward the thundering waterfall and their last refuge. The cost of their defiance was being counted in the lives of her friends, her teachers, the last guardians of a dying craft. Survival was no longer a hope. It was a demand written in the grim set of every remaining elf's jaw, a demand that would consume the very last of their strength. The counter song's echo had not yet faded when a new vision tore through Celebrian's mind. It was not a memory, but a living scene of breathtaking power and terrible vulnerability. She saw the Lady Galadriel standing atop a high flet in Lothlórien, Nenya, the ring of water, ablaze upon her hand. A shimmering, pearlescent dome of energy blossomed from the ring, enveloping the golden wood, deflecting the dark will that pressed against its borders. The assault on their own sanctuary had been a feint, a distraction, while the true blow fell upon their kin. Galadriel was making a stand, a beacon of defiance that lit the western sky, but in doing so, she had drawn the direct, burning gaze of the eye. Celebrian's breath caught. Their desperate act of cleansing, their counter-song, had not gone unnoticed. They had forced Sauron's hand, and he was now testing the strength of every remaining stronghold. Her own fight had endangered the last great refuge of their people. The choice was agonizingly clear. To allow the rings to remain active was to give the enemy a fixed point to focus his wrath, a target he would shatter with his full might. The network of light that sustained the Elven realms had to be extinguished, or it would become a web that trapped them all. With a heart heavy as stone, she gave the order. Messengers were dispatched on swift, secret paths, carrying a single, stark command to the guardians of the three. The rings must go silent, their light must be hidden, their power left dormant. It was a strategic surrender, a retreat into absolute secrecy to protect their allies from a storm they had inadvertently called down. In Lothlórien, the shimmering dome of protection wavered and faded as Galadriel, understanding the grim necessity, withdrew Nenya's power. The same silence fell over Imladris and the Grey Havens. The consequence for Celebrian's own band was immediate and profound. The subtle harmonies that had masked their valley, sustained by the ring's distant resonance, dissolved like mist in a sudden wind. They were now truly alone, huddled in the growing dark, their last connection to the wider world of elven power severed to save it. One by one, the lights of the west were going out. The silence in the cave was no longer a shield, but a suffocating blanket of doubt. Fear is a patient poison, and after the brutal assault and the forced silencing of the rings, it began to work its way through the hearts of the survivors. The cost of their defiance was no longer an abstract concept. It was etched into the empty spaces where friends had once stood, and in the bandaged wounds that refused to heal with their old swiftness. Around the dim fire, the arguments began, not as shouts, but as hollow whispers in the dark. A faction led by the master smith Calanthir, his hands still trembling from the backlash of the unmaking ritual, gave voice to the collective exhaustion. Why are we still fighting a war we cannot win? Our craft is broken, our rings are silent, and every step we take only brings more death upon us. The wise path is to fade away, to go so deep into the wilds that even the shadow cannot find us. To survive is not cowardice, it is the only victory left to us. His words found a desperate echo in many tired hearts. The dream of a safe, hidden haven, far from the drums of war, was a powerful lure. But Celebrian stood, her own weariness a heavy cloak she refused to acknowledge. If we hide, we have already lost. We are not merely preserving our own lives, we are safeguarding a truth. The knowledge of how to fight this shadow, the understanding of the rings and their counter-song, that is the one weapon we possess that the enemy truly fears. To abandon the quest is not to survive, it is to surrender the future of this world. The debate that followed was a painful tearing of an already frayed fabric. Old comrades, who had forged wonders side by side for centuries, now looked at each other across a chasm of diverging hope. Accusations of recklessness were met with charges of faithlessness. The unity that had been their greatest strength was splintering before the relentless pressure of despair. In the end, the rift could not be mended. When the dawn broke, a full third of the survivors, led by Calanthyr, gathered their few belongings. There were no grand farewells, only tearless, grim-faced nods of finality. They turned their backs on the waterfall and walked away, disappearing into the mist-shrouded trees, seeking the fragile peace of oblivion. As the sound of their departure faded, a strange, grim clarity settled over those who remained. The group was smaller, dangerously so, but the air felt different. The constant undercurrent of doubt was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. They had not chosen the easy path, or even the safe one. They had chosen the right one, and in that choice, their loyalty to each other and to their cause was refined into something as hard and sharp as the finest elven steel. The air in the cave was thick with the scent of damp stone and lost hope. Celebrian sat apart from the others, her gaze fixed on the embers of their small fire. They had fought with power, and it had broken them. They had fought with cleverness, and it had cost them their kin. What was left when every weapon turned against its wielder? She closed her eyes, reaching past the memory of shrieking metal and the backlash of shattered magic, back to the very first lessons of her craft. She sought the oldest song, the one whispered to be the source of all making, the secret fire that the Valor had used to kindle the world into being. It was not a flame of destruction or domination. It was a spark of pure, unforced life, the breath of existence itself. Her epiphany arrived not as a shout, but as a quiet warmth in her soul. They had been trying to build a wall to stop a flood, but the true resistance was not in the wall. It was in the strength of the soil and the roots of the trees. The shadow sought to dominate, to twist all will into a single, terrible note. The only answer was not to play its game at all. The true power, the only force that could never be truly conquered, was the simple, stubborn act of preservation. It was the memory of a sunrise, the scent of rain on leaves, the story of a kindness passed down through generations. Domination could shatter a kingdom, but it could not erase a remembered song. She rose and went to her companions, her face illuminated by a new, calm light. "We have been wrong," she said, her voice clear and steady. "We have been trying to forge a sword to fight the darkness, but we are not warriors. We are gardeners. Our purpose is not to oppose the shadow with its own tools, but to tend the light that it seeks to extinguish. From this day, we do not forge weapons of power. We create vessels of memory, their work transformed. They gathered not star metal and enchanted gems, but river-smoothed stones, seeds from the oldest trees, and vials of clear water from their hidden stream. They did not sing songs of command, but melodies of remembrance, weaving into these simple objects the echoes of Eregion in its prime, the feeling of starlight on still water, the taste of the first fruit of spring. One forgemaster, her hands once capable of shaping molten gold, now spent days polishing a single river stone until it held a soft, internal glow, a vessel for the memory of unbroken peace. This was not a retreat. It was a deeper, more fundamental form of resistance. They were building an ark, not of wood, but of spirit, ensuring that even if the shadow covered all the lands, the memory of what was good and beautiful would not be lost. The hope they forged now was quieter. but its roots ran deeper than any power ring, for it was built not to dominate the world, but to cherish it. The forge fire was not of flame, but of memory. Celebrian and the last masters gathered around a simple stone basin, filled with the pure water of their hidden stream. Into it, they did not pour molten metal, but the very substance of their hope. One by one, they came forward, each placing a hand upon the water's surface. They did not sing songs of power, but whispered recollections, the scent of pine after rain in Lothlórien, the sound of the sea against the grey havens, the golden light of a Lorelin sunrise remembered only in legend. They poured out their love for the fading world, a selfless offering without any desire to control or command. As their collective memories coalesced, the water in the basin began to glow, swirling with captured light and emotion, condensing and hardening not into a ring or a weapon, but into a single, flawless crystal. They called it the Heartstone, a vessel for the soul of all they sought to preserve. The act of its making was a release, not a binding, a final, perfect note in the melody of their craft. As the last memory was woven into its core, the Heartstone flared with a light that held no heat, only a profound, cleansing purity. It was a light that did not push back the darkness with force, but simply refused to acknowledge its existence. In that instant, the orc patrols scouring the nearby valleys cried out, not in pain, but in confusion, their vision filled with a blinding whiteness that erased all shadow and malice from their minds. For a few precious moments, the enemy was rendered harmless, not by sword or spell, but by a beauty so absolute it could not be comprehended by a heart bent on dominion. When the light faded, the Heartstone pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm, a quiet heartbeat echoing in the cave. Their greatest work was complete, an artifact that held no power over others, only the sacred duty of remembrance. It was the final, definitive answer to the pride of the rings, a creation born not from the desire to rule the world, but from the simple, unbreakable will to love it. They placed the Heartstone in the deepest chamber of the waterfall sanctuary, setting it upon a natural pedestal of living rock. A soft, pervasive light immediately began to emanate from the crystal, not a beam to be seen, but a gentle luminescence that seeped into the very stone and air. It felt like the first breath of a spring morning after a long winter, a quiet warmth that lifted a weight no one had fully acknowledged was there. Within this sphere of influence, the oppressive dread that had dogged their every step simply dissolved. The constant, whispering fear of corruption, the nagging thought that their own magic might be twisted against them, faded into silence. For the first time since the Fall of Eregion, the elves could breathe freely. A master forger could once again sing a shaping song over a piece of metal, without a paralyzing fear that a single wrong note would invite the shadow in. A healer could channel her power into mending a wound without the terrible anxiety that a trace of darkness might linger in the magic. They were not hidden, not cowering. They were protected, insulated by a power that Sauron's will, built on domination and fear, could not comprehend and therefore could not breach. The sanctuary had become a small, defiant pocket of the world, as it was meant to be. This enduring light proved a profound truth they had forgotten in their pursuit of grand power. Their true strength was never in a ring that could command the elements, but in their unity of purpose. It was in their shared will to preserve, to remember, to create for the sake of creation itself. The Heartstone was not a weapon they wielded, but a testament to what they were when they worked together without pride or suspicion. Word of this safe haven, this place where light endured unbroken, began to travel along secret paths. It was not a call to arms, but a whisper of proof. To the scattered rangers of the north, to the hardy woodmen of the forests, and to the few dwarves who still remembered old alliances, it became a symbol. It was a beacon that said the shadow was not absolute, that there were still places where its influence ended and the free peoples could thrive. In the heart of the wilderness, a sanctuary of light endured, not by fighting the darkness on its own terms, but by simply, stubbornly, being a place the darkness could not touch. A profound stillness settled over Celebrían, deeper than any she had known before. It was not the quiet of peace, but the hush of a candle guttering out after a long, bright burn. She could feel it, a fundamental change within her own being. The vibrant energy that had sustained her for centuries, the very light of her elven spirit, had been poured in its essence into the Heartstone. Her hands, once steady enough to weave starlight into metal, now trembled with a faint, constant tremor. The world around her, once sharp and vivid, seemed to be viewed through a thin, gray veil. She was fading, her physical form slowly unraveling like a thread pulled from a magnificent tapestry. This was the true and final cost of their salvation, a piece of her immortality, given freely to preserve the memory of all they had loved. Yet, when she looked upon the softly pulsing Heartstone, there was no regret in her heart, only a quiet and profound acceptance. She had traded the endurance of her own body for the enduring light of a legacy that would outlast the shadow itself. Her personal journey was nearing its end, but the story of her people was now secured for chapters yet unwritten. With this certainty, she turned her fading strength to her most vital final task. She summoned her apprentice, a young elf named Lothlórien, whose keen mind and steadfast heart had been tempered in the fires of their long exile. Celebrían did not speak of her own diminishing as a tragedy, but as a natural passing of the torch. She began to impart the final, most guarded layers of knowledge, not just the locations of the hidden rings or the nuances of the counter song, but the heavier wisdom of leadership itself. She taught him how to listen to the fears of his people without being swayed by them, how to make choices that value the future over immediate safety, and how to bear the weight of terrible secrets without letting them crush his spirit. She was not creating a new forgemaster in her image, but a guardian for the world she would leave behind, ensuring that the light of the Heartstone would never again be threatened by the pride that had once forged the rings. The waterfall's roar was the only music for their final rite. In the Heartstone's gentle glow, Celebrían stood before the last of her people, her form almost translucent against the luminous crystal. She did not speak of power or victory, but of a quiet, unyielding vigilance. Then she turned to Lothlórien and placed her hands over his. Her voice was soft, yet it carried to every corner of the chamber. The guardianship is yours now, not of weapons, but of memory, not of dominion, but of light. With those words, she transferred the last secret, the precise mental resonance needed to sense the hidden presence of the three rings, a knowledge passed not through scrolls, but from one spirit to another. She then led him to the Heartstone itself, guiding his palm to rest upon its cool, pulsing surface. "This is our greatest work," she whispered. "It asks for nothing, and in that, it is everything. Protect it not from thieves, but from the pride that would seek to use it." Lairon met her gaze, his own eyes bright with the weight of the charge. "I vow to guard these treasures with my life," he said, his voice steady. "But more than that, I vow to uphold the purpose they represent. We will remember the cost. We will not repeat the pride." One by one, the new generation of forgemasters stepped forward, each laying a hand upon the stone, their silent oath merging with its enduring rhythm. They were not the legendary smiths of old, but they were wiser, their resolve forged in loss and tempered by a truth harder than any metal. They understood that their craft was now an act of stewardship, a quiet gardening of hope in a world still shadowed. As the ceremony concluded, a profound shift settled over the sanctuary. The legacy of the Elven Forgemasters, once a story of glorious creation and catastrophic error, was now something else entirely. It was a promise, secured not in a vault of gold, but in the steadfast hearts of those who had learned that the most powerful magic is not that which commands the world, but that which strives to keep it whole. Generations passed like leaves falling in an endless autumn. The waterfall sanctuary, bathed in the Heartstone's enduring light, became a place out of time, a secret woven into the very fabric of the land. The grand forges of Eregion were a distant, painful memory, their clamor replaced by the patient, quiet work of preservation. These new forgemasters, taught by Lairon and those who came after him, did not seek to build empires or command the elements. Their craft was a subtle art, a gentle hand guiding the world they had sworn to protect. To a ranger of the north, whose sword had been notched in a skirmish with goblins, they might offer a blade that never dulled, its edge honed with a song of enduring strength. To a village plagued by a creeping sickness, born of foul water, they would send a traveler with a simple clay vessel that purified any liquid poured into it, a humble vessel imbued with the memory of clean mountain springs. Their aid was never signed, their presence never announced. They became the unseen gardeners of hope, tending to the small, vital fires of civilization so they would not be extinguished by the growing dark. This was the long vigil, a watch measured not in years, but in centuries of steadfast silence. The world outside their hidden valley changed. Kingdoms of men rose and fell, their songs of glory and lament echoing faintly through the forests. The shadow in the east grew and receded like a poisonous tide, its attention turning to new lands and new foes. Yet through it all, the Guardians remained, their purpose unchanging. They became a hidden order, a secret kept even from most of their own kin. The full, terrible truth of the Rings' creation, the story of Celebrimbor's pride and Celebrian's sacrifice, was a burden passed only from one chosen leader to the next. To the outside world, they were perhaps a reclusive clan of skilled artisans, if they were known at all. Their true role and the profound cost of the power they guarded faded into legend, and then from legend into myth. And so their watch continued, an unending duty in a world that slowly forgot the debt it owed them. While kings made war and merchants sought wealth, the Forgemasters kept their silent vigil over the Heartstone and the dormant rings, a timeless sentinel against a shadow that never truly slept. The weight of their knowledge was a cold stone in the heart of each new generation, a constant reminder that some victories are not won with a single, glorious battle, but with a patience that outlasts mountains. The final journey begins not with a grand procession, but with a quiet acceptance. Selibrian stood at the edge of the sea, her form almost spectral in the salt-laced air, feeling the pull of the West as a deep, resonant chord her spirit could no longer ignore. Her work was done, the legacy secured, but the cost was etched into her very being. She had poured too much of her own essence into the Heartstone and the long vigil to remain in Middle-earth without unraveling completely. To stay was to fade into a memory, a whisper on the wind. To sail was to seek healing in the undying lands, a chance to mend a spirit worn thin by centuries of sacrifice and sorrow. Her departure was more than a personal voyage. It was the closing of a chapter written in starlight and shadow. She was one of the last direct witnesses to the Rings of Power, a living library of their creation, their terrible cost, and their final safeguarding. As her ship slipped past the horizon, it carried with it the deepest, most perilous secrets of the Elven Forgemasters, knowledge that would now sleep in the West, far from the grasping reach of any future darkness. An era of direct, world-shaping magic receded with the white sails, leaving behind a guarded hope and a world that would have to find its own strength. The age of the elves as the chief architects of Middle-earth's fate was quietly, irrevocably passing into legend. The long vigil ended not with a shout, but with a tremor in the stone itself. Deep within their sanctuary, the Heartstone flared, its gentle pulse quickening into a brilliant, steady rhythm. The War of the Last Alliance had reached its climax on the plains of Mordor, and the final, desperate clash of light against shadow resonated through the very foundations of the world. The hidden Forgemasters gathered around their crystal, not to forge a weapon, but to become a lens. They focused the Heartstone's accumulated light, all the memories of starlight and spring mornings, all the echoes of lost cities and enduring hope, and they projected it outward as a wave of pure, reinforcing strength. It was not a blade that struck the enemy, but a shield that fortified the hearts of the men and elves fighting beneath the shadow's very gate. When a warrior faltered, a sudden clarity would dispel his fear. When a banner seemed ready to fall, an unseen hand seemed to steady it. Theirs was the subtle power that mended a broken line, that turned a desperate parry into a winning stroke, the quiet hum of preservation against the deafening roar of annihilation. Then, in a single, seismic instant, they felt it. A scream of pure malice, vast and ancient, was suddenly severed. It was the sound of a chain breaking, a dominion shattering. Across the miles, they perceived the moment Isildur's sword fell, the moment the ring was cut from Sauron's hand. The dark bonds that had gripped the world for an age snapped, and the ensuing silence was filled only by the Heartstone's triumphant, unwavering song. In that victory, they felt the vindication of every sacrifice, the meaning of their long exile. The world would sing of kings and warriors, but the true, untold power behind that victory was a quiet, preserved light that had refused to be extinguished. The shadow was broken, its physical form defeated, but within the sanctuary, they knew it was not forgotten. A shadow, once so vast, always leaves an echo. The ring may have been taken, but it was not destroyed, and their watch, it seemed, was not yet over. The silence after the Great War was a fragile, precious thing. While the kingdoms of men raised new cities and sang songs of their hard-won victory, the hidden Forgemasters did not lay down their burden. Their vigil merely changed its nature. The immediate threat of the shadow was gone, but the rings of power remained, and the knowledge of their making was a secret too dangerous to ever be forgotten. Their sanctuary, still bathed in the Heartstone's gentle light, became a living archive, a place where the true cost of power was remembered so the world would not have to pay it again. They did not seek glory or recognition, for their greatest strength was in being unknown. To the outside world, they were a myth, a whisper of a reclusive clan of artisans. But in truth, they were the guardians of a timeless truth, that the most profound power is not the power to break, but the power to mend, not to command, but to preserve. The legacy of Celebrimbor's pride and Celebrian's sacrifice was now a quiet flame in their keeping, a flame that would illuminate the dark corners of history long after the names of kings had turned to dust. Their story, untold in the grand chronicles of Middle-earth, became the hidden foundation upon which the peace of the ages was built, a testament to the simple, stubborn power of memory itself.
you.